Okay, I apologize, had some trouble with the camera, but I'll continue from where I left off. We had just reviewed the consonants, and for the most part, the characters that represent those sounds are going to be the letters that we use to represent them in spelling too. However, there are a few that are different from the letters that we use in English, which there is going to be a figure there in the book. I've already explained them though, but just so that we have for the reference, we have the exact same symbols and the chart. Another thing to consider would be phonetic variation, which they mention are allophones. The phonemes are not always produced the same, and they can undergo the changes of pronunciation based on their position in the words and the sounds that surround them. So we have the allophones of K, a case of assimilation, and I know we think of the word assimilation like in groups. As an immigrant group would come, they assimilate to those around them. We'll think of it's the same idea that the sounds assimilate to the sounds around them. So for example, in keep cool, and if we figure, like we say that keep cool, pay attention to where the K phoneme is. The K in keep would be towards the middle and front, and cool was going to come back. The reason for that is they assimilate to those neighboring sounds. And keep, that E vowel is going to be high and a little bit more front E. And so that's why it just kind of blends with that. The cool sound, the ool, is a little bit more back, which is why it assimilates and gets ready to enunciate that sound. So that's the assimilation of K. And we have the allophones of T. This is a complex case just because T has 6 different variations, as in top, which hits right on the alveolar, the pot, same, kitten, and kitten, we don't really pronounce the T, we pronounce the N, so it almost feels like this part, the T, would be in our throat, kind of, kitten. Letter, it kind of rolls like the R in Spanish, letter, like in pero. Train blends with the R, and stop blends with the S. Okay? So finally, we're in grouping the units. After they've already described it this way, the linguists are going to come back to the phonemes, and they develop a description of the language by grouping these units. There's just a variety of ways of grouping. You can group them, for example, in vowels and consonants, or in vowel phonemes, such as long, short, reduced, or high, back, low, etc. Consonant phonemes, you can group them as those voiceless stops or the voiced stops. There's just a variety of ways depending on what the linguists want to study. So we think creating groups of phonemes that share certain characteristics allows linguists to make general observations about the language or a language, and also compare languages. So when we think of the phonemes that we have in English, and we think of the phonemes of somebody that might have another language, we have to kind of start seeing, well, let's group them this way, maybe this way, so that we can see and compare which ones can be transferable or non-transferable. I know in education we think the ones that we can transfer, that's going to be a little bit easier. The ones that are not transferable, those would be your direct teach. So finally, finding the dependencies among the units, this is where we think of the rules. In the final step, means studying the groups of the phonological rules, which are generalizations in the description of the language. So these rules are describing how a phoneme or phonemes depend on or are affected by phonemes in the speech environment. So one of the rules that they mentioned in the book was the phonological rule, the co-articulations of nasals and stops. Co-articulation means when two phonemes are articulated in the same place, like for the same place in the mouth, for example, and d, which are both alveolars. It is an example of assimilation. Consider words with nasals such as or consonant stops, p, t, k, okay, or b, d, g. In lamp, amber, hint, band, thank, linguist. So the rule in these, and again I included a chart just in case so you can reference a book, the rule is whenever a nasal precedes an oral stop within a syllable, the two stops will have the same place of articulation. That is, they are co-articulated, such as in lamp. So that is going to have the M and the P blend together. They are co-articulated. In amber, in hint, the nt, they're in the same place of articulation. Again, these are nasals. The nasals once more are So notice that nasal comes before the stop, That's where they mean the co-articulation. In band, in think, back here, in linguist. Okay. The other rule that they mention is the morphemic rule for the plurals. So we have the pronunciation of the plural suffix. So when we want to have something be a suffix, we know that it'll end in S or ES, right? But the sounds that they make are going to be, the morphemic rules that apply would apply to the smallest units of meaning. For example, in trees we have two morphemes, which are tree, because that's what we get, the visual of what, the tree. And then we have the S, which means more than one. Now, so when we make it plural, we'll either hear s, z, or is. For example, in mats. Now remember that the rule is, if it ends in a sibilant sound like s or z, then we're going to go is. If it ends in a voiceless sound, then ands, then it's going to be in a voice sound. So for example, mats. Mats just has regular ts because of that voiceless t. Bats, the theta is voiceless, so that's going to end in ts. However, if we have in plays, it's going to have the play, that's voiced, so it's going to have a z sound. Such as in drama, that last sound is voiced, so it's going to have z sound. If it already ends in s or z, such as in bus, we're going to say buses, or maze, mazes. And that's the rule that they give us there for the morphemic plural. So in general, this chapter, I did like this quote, so I will just read it. Knowledge of phonology is an important part of any teacher's pedagogical knowledge. When teachers understand phonology, they can better choose methods and techniques for teaching a second language and for teaching reading. So I know as a teacher, when I drew on that knowledge of linguistics, whatever I could remember, I did try to stress the way that our mouth forms these sounds and where to feel the sound. So you see the children like stretching their lips, or feeling the tension here, or feeling just the air passage. And that attention was helping, especially because the majority of my students have been second language learners, and so they needed to see the connection with sounds. Now we also do talk about the transferable and non-transferable skills when we talk to teachers and students, as that some are going to be pretty much the same. Some you have to directly teach. So when I thought of the research article, I wanted something along the same lines. I found one called Phenomenological Study, the impacts of developing phonetic awareness through technology resources on English language learners' communicative competences. But the authors found was a challenge was that the ELLs could not communicate effectively. And they believed that this was from fear of mispronouncing the words, because there's just so many different sounds in English that they were afraid of making a mistake. So they also believe that this is attributed to the lack of opportunities to interact in authentic English experiences with native English speakers. So they explored the two questions. To what extent does phonemic awareness development influence students' communication skills, and how effective is implementation of technology to develop phonemic awareness? They reference the research on the interlanguage hypothesis, which is stating that the two systems of language are at play while developing their second language. The native language is going to be that foundation so that they can develop the language structures and rules of the second language. The authors also state that though the interlanguage is good for development of cognitive abilities, they warn that the interlanguage can become a fossilized language if the teachers don't directly address it, and which comes through the phonemic awareness, that they have to teach phonemic awareness to address those interlanguage issues. So they mentioned the Ecuador, because that they don't really have speakers or native speakers of English, so there are little to no English speakers. That means that there's not enough pronunciation opportunities for real pronunciations of English, or the variations. The opportunities are pretty poor. This leads to them creating their own variations for the English sounds, especially those that are exclusive to English. And they mention such as eth, which sounds and this syllable, which sounds like sh, like in shoe. And so they'll come up with their own ways of pronouncing it if they don't have the practice with native speakers. So that they posit that this essential study that it is essential to gain some knowledge about the phonology, English phonology. And this would be the development of phonemic awareness so that they can have better pronunciation. And if they have better pronunciation, they're going to be motivated to use the language orally in speech. And then that, again, will in turn bring stronger communicative competence. So they propose a study with ELLs in Ecuador. Again, they cite this because there aren't very many native English speakers for them to practice with. And they explain that they wanted to use technology for this because they believe that technology fosters that autonomy. It's going to be more at their pace, and it's going to give them guidance and encouragement if they're exposed to native English speakers and the native English speaker pronunciation. So they propose platforms for meaning, like we mentioned in the first question of the book, just communicating. So just communicating an authentic experience, they recommend listening to some YouTube, some broadcasts, some TED videos, to listen just for that authentic English and the way that it's used. But then when it's going to come to the phonology, about pronunciation of individual sounds, they recommend the Sounds Pronunciation app and the International Phonetic Alphabet app. And then this is going to help their pronunciation. So they do give a little bit of the two, just like the chapter questions. Furthermore, that direct contact with the English language and its phonemic alphabet in real time and settings allows for them to experience the English in the variations that are going to enhance their communicative competence. In real time, especially since there's always changes to the language, it's constantly evolving, but especially in countries where English is not the target language. So this was the gist of my presentation, again on the communication using English authentically, and again how to describe it into individual phonemes. And these are my references. Thank you.